Hi everyone. So I'm just going to bring up on stage so she can join us. There's backstage. You can come up. You can come on the stage in different ways. Let me just do this. So we've just invited Lorna to come and join us. And we'll get started. This is our third speaker. Hey.
Morning again.
Yeah, morning. So we're on to our third session. Lorna's already popped on stage to join us, and it just gives me great pleasure. Lorna and I have known each other for many, many years, and Lorna makes me more me. So Lorna she shows up totally in her own skin. She's, for me, you're the most diverse, and you show up as you, and that makes me more me. So I've always enjoyed your company, and I can't wait to get stuck in. Now, before I do, have you noticed what colour I'm wearing?
Yes, well done. Very purple, very nice.
Wow, Lorna. So Lorna shows up in purple, okay? It's your thing. But did you know that the International Women's Day historically started in 1908? I didn't know that. And the reason why the International Women's Day is purple, there's a meaning to it, Lorna. And it's symbolic or represents justice and dignity.
Nice.
I thought you'd like that. And I think the way you wear purple, justice and dignity. And I think all of us being able to have a different lens on the world doesn't mean we have to drop our dignity and show up and be really quite unpalatable to others. And I just think, Lorna, you wear purple so beautifully, and that's what it means. There are two other colours for International Women's Day. One is green, and that's to symbolise hope. What's my favourite colour, Lorna?
Green.
Green. I got married in a lime green wedding dress, for God's sakes. And then the last one, now this is very me, okay, is white. This is the three colours, purple, green and white. But white is controversial because, are you ready for this, Lorna? It's supposed to represent purity.
Well, that's me all over.
I just thought I am controversial, like that's how I choose to be more me. And if I'm in my white purity, I think it is controversial in 2021 as a symbolic colour for International Women's Day. I don't know what to do with that purity, but we can be more into our justice and into our dignity and into our hope. And I've lived off hope for the last 12 months. So let us dig in. Lorna, I am so excited about our topic, our session, and you wanted to share with many horse lovers making equitation science a tellable story and what that actually looks like. So tell us your story, and you and I will just ebb and flow as we do.
Well, I've put together a few little memes as well for us to pick up some of the things I think are really important. So we can maybe do that a little bit later, although we don't often run out of things to talk about, that's for sure. But I think, and it's picking up on something Christina was saying in her session earlier, is I think equitation science somehow needs to be a story that people can see themselves in. And very often, I think that's how historically in human civilization, knowledge was passed on. It was made into a parable or a fable, or your values were made in that storytelling. And that's something that we've done for millennia. And somehow we don't seem to have been able to make equitation science into a story that everybody sees themselves in. And I think that's sometimes causes a bit of lack of of connection and lack of uptake. And it's something I try and do with my students. I try and get them to see themselves in that story, and try to get them to actually understand that we're not all perfect. We're not making everything perfect for every horse. What we're doing is trying to do the best we can, maybe. And sometimes I think that's about making yourself into a story so that the students can actually see your journey. Because I for sure, I always tell my students that I have an internal battle about everything. An example is the recent banning of shaven whiskers. My background is as an international competition groom, and I fully understand as a scientist why horses should have their whiskers on. I get that. I get the science. I'm totally for and behind that. But I still have a little divil on my shoulder, on the left shoulder, which is my old competition groom self saying, oh, but look how pretty they are when you take all their whiskers off. They look really untidy otherwise. So by sharing that argument, I think that internal argument I have helps the students to see that it's a journey. It's not about everybody knowing everything right from the word go. And I think that helps them to see themselves in that story and relate a little bit more to it, or at least that's my kind of
Yeah,
approach.
Lorna, that's so lovely. That word relatability, like, isn't that how we create connection? So we've been hearing these little snippets in the chat about being more together. Well, we've got more in common than we have apart. And I think being able to see that we all feel the same, like we all experience pain, we all bleed, we all can feel joy. Like what you're recognizing is our relatability to each other and our difference. We don't have to be homogenous. And I think that's the bit where, if your students came up on stage now, I wonder if there's any that are watching who would like to hop on stage, because I know that you show up and we talk about being, you and I, I'm flawed. I am absolutely perfectly imperfect. And, that is something that the equestrian industry really doesn't lead with. I'm going to come on to it more this week, actually. I'm catching up with high performance coach Corinne Bracken, and we're going to be really going there with what you and I know, which is mistakes absolutely shape our journeys. And they actually put us on the path we're supposed to be on. It is those mistakes. And I just think when we're trying not to be vulnerable, or vulnerability is always a strength. When I say vulnerability, I'm talking about risk, emotional exposure, uncertainty. When we show up in our vulnerability, I've noticed we become more relatable. Is that what you do with your story, Lorna? Do you step into your mistakes and let your students see who you are?
Absolutely. I try and relate the story of when I've done things wrong in the past, when I think I've let horses down in hindsight. As a groom, there are many times you're the advocate for the horse's welfare, because you're not the one getting the medal. You're not the one who has to deal with your sponsors, so your job, or I always saw my job as a groom as being that advocate for horse welfare, and trying to have a non-emotional response and be the one who puts the hand up and says, do you really think that's a good idea? And sometimes that can put you in a really awkward position, and sometimes you're wrong, but you're never wrong asking the question, because it makes people think about the decisions that they're making, I think. And that takes some bravery, I always think, when grooms do that, because your house, your job, your reputation within the industry is very much intertwined in that one particular person. And if you're the one putting your hand up and saying, is that a good idea, or should we be doing it this way, or maybe we need to approach this in a different way, you're actually risking a lot for those horses. But I guess you have to be brave in that advocacy, I guess.
Lorna, you've always been brave and you've always risked. And I think this is something about being like, I think for me, as a longtime friend, you're always comfortable with discomfort. And that might be the first step we may all need to explore for ourselves. I think you mentioned a few things about being righteous. And one of the things that I take from talking to you is your ability to rethink. So, you know that you sit in this, you called it this internal dialogue with discomfort between let's take whiskers. It's a great one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because but they belong to the horse. They don't belong to being whipped off. And
I know.
Your humanness of how that sits or lands on the conditioned Lorna, who was bloody good at her job. I knew you as a groom and you were shit hot. So I know that there was the conditioned rub, but look how you always rethink for horses. And it has put you in very difficult, like you've often been alone because you've spoken up for the horse. Is there anything you'd like to share on that? Is there any sort of comment or?
Well, I suppose I actually moving to Sparshow was a learning process for me in the first year I was there. I came straight from doing competition horses onto a yard where actually a lot of our horses live out. They would, be a bit muddy and maybe their manes wouldn't be quite as tidy as I wanted, and et cetera, et cetera. And I had a real problem with it. I couldn't even touch their tack. I was like, oh God, you can put this on a horse, I just couldn't deal with it. But actually I learned after a while that we have a yard full of college horses and I don't think we've got a single one with any stereotypic behaviour. Lots of researchers come to us and say, oh, we'd like to, investigate windsuckers or whatever. And we're like, yeah, I haven't got any. And people can't believe it, but that's the compromise. The compromise there is that I had to learn that a happy horse is not necessarily the gleaming, clean competition horse image that I always had in my head, as and I thought I was doing the best thing for the horse by making it pretty and shiny and lovely and neat as a pin. But actually, these horses who work very hard in college environments, I'm doing more for them by allowing them to have that social contact and allowing them to actually be horses. And that was a steep learning curve for me in that first year, I think. And I found it really hard, but then I quite like hard.
Yeah, you do, and that's how you show up, and your students recognise that. But also, let's talk about your research. I think your research for me, you are a pioneer, which is why you're a speaker at our conference, and you walk the wilderness. So let's just put a spotlight specifically on women's anatomy and equestrianism.
You mean boobs? Just say boobs. It's fine.
I've never been used to it. My boobs. Okay, so let's just put I know we're both quite fun at everything, but let's just put our heads on this. We both run. So this is about functional. We run for our mental health, we run for our physical health, and we have access to research on how to dress. What attire optimizes our running. When we go to quest, like we've both ridden all our lives, we go into this space and it's empty. Is that correct? Like, talk us through how you showed up, women.
Well, actually, it was over a cup of tea and a chat. That's always how the best research projects start, I think. And at the time, I was investigating actually rider anxiety in female dressage riders and coping strategies, etc. And I was working with the guys at the University of Portsmouth. And I was having a cup of tea and a chat with somebody, a lady called Dr. Jenny Burbage, and she's a part of their research group in breast health. And they're pioneers in breast health in female athletes, non-equestrian. So we were just chatting about the fact that often when I was competing in dressage, all the way through and into one test, for example, in sitting trot on a very bouncy old horse of mine who really didn't move very well, I used to have to vet wrap myself down. And I said, but it was okay. It was pink vet wrap, so I felt quite feminine when I was doing it.
Laughing emojis, it's brilliant. You're right. yourself.
Get those bad boys strapped down. So we got talking, and we actually worked out that this work had not been done in equestrians, and yet a vast majority of equestrians are female. And also of a slightly different body shape than most runners, myself excluded, because I'm certainly not shaped like a runner, but we kind of thought, well, let's have a look. So we did some surveys, and we immediately got 1,300 respondents. So we're thinking, this is an issue here, I think, just by the amount of people that respond. And then we've taken that on, and we've done lots of research on minimizing, so banish the bounce, minimizing that movement, and actually trying to work out, is the movement in riding the same? Should we be telling riders just to wear sports bras? Or actually, is there different movement on the horse? Should we be encouraging people to begin to design better riding bras? And what's the pain? How does it impact your riding? Because we find such a lot of female riders riding in pain. Well, come on, that's got to impact your communication with the horse. You know, if you're riding like this, trying to keep yourself not in pain, how are you then able to respond to the horse? How you just can't do it, you know? So we did that research and actually have presented that at some ISIS conferences, etc., to a lot of hilarity, because even the people chairing the sessions thought it was funny. But you need to have the confidence to just be shameless and stand up and talk about boobs, because it's a really important area of research and real big problem for equestrians. So we need to talk about it. And it was really interesting when I presented at ISIS I think it was the one in Zamur, everybody thought it was hilarious, but you have to not be worried that they're laughing at your research, because there'll be some people out there going, oh my God, this is talking to me. This is the solution to my problem.
Oh, gorgeous. Listen, thank you so much. That's been really, really useful. I was actually even thinking, as you were talking, look at all the love hearts coming in for you. I was even thinking, as you were talking, about now we're going to shift this conversation now onto shame and shaming. And you just gave me a beautiful link, because, you know, we're in this space of righteousness. And the fact that you have the ability to rethink and to ebb and flow out of what you did do, because one of the things that I talk about a lot is doing what's the right thing at the right time in the right way, and then we rethink. The next new information comes along, and we change. Now that, I think, has been a real sticking point for equestrians. Can we explore the actual pain of shame and shaming when we're being the prosecutor and calling out to other horse lovers, what they're not doing? Can you and I have that conversation?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because whatever you do, so some of our research we're doing at the moment, we're doing a massive project on female body image and riding, and how that impacts your ability to ride, but also your feeling of being included. And some of that is about shaming, you know. And we're doing this in research on female body image, not to suggest that it's nothing about weight or anything. It's about the perception people have of themselves. And I think we have to be very careful in some of those conversations, that we're not saying if you are larger, you shouldn't ride. What I'm saying is we need to know what you're thinking about yourself so that we can help, you know, not shaming, you know. And I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to take a 2-second break, because my dog is running around because he's desperate to go outside for a wee. And when you have a 13-year-old Cocker Spaniel, when he needs to go out, he needs to go out. 2 seconds.
Hey, I've been homeschooling for months. Today he's gone to school. I wanted to talk to you guys, all of you, about this whole acceptance of who we are, and this whole it is actually referred to as self-love. And what I mean by that is not apologizing for your body. Now, there is I think while she nipped out, I was going to explain the difference between shame and guilt. I don't know if everyone does know the difference. So I think that would be quite useful as a starting point. Guilt is I did something bad, or what I did has had all these terrible, so it could be what I did is use jaw reins, which means it's relentless pressure on my horse's mouth. There's no opportunity. But what I did was bad. I've got loads of stories like that. So I've done things that are bad. Now that guilt has prompted change and change in my own behavior because of the guilt. So guilt works whereby you can take yourself out of it and go, what I did was bad. When we start to show up and say, I am bad. Now, if it's a body image shaming, that who I am as this, let's say, I don't even want to start using language about difference. I love different women, diversity, and men, by the way. I love diverse bodies, diverse brains. And I think when we start to look at my body over your body, and we attach that's my body is bad and yours is not, we're screwed. Like this whole shaming each other is totally destroying, and it's hurting our relationships with ourselves and relationships with our horses.
I totally agree. And I think sometimes, my journey as into fitness, I was a 44-year-old person climbing up a mountain as the fat middle-aged person at the back. That's how I felt with, and then I saw two trail runners run past me who were considerably older than me. And I said, I want to be that person. I don't want to be the person at the back struggling. I want to be the person who's going forward. And originally for me, that was about being thin, which was unrealistic because that's not my shape. But
hey, we all relate to that. It's very measurable, isn't it? It's measurable. Yeah. It's like, if only I'm thin, I'll be happy. And
which is not true. It's not true. But I've got to the stage with my journey through fitness, and I certainly was never a runner, but my God, I love it now. But I remember I messaged you last summer because I had a moment where I was out running. I had too warm a top on, and I just took my top off and I ran in my bra. And okay, I live on Salisbury Plain here, so nobody's going to see me, basically. But I had to message you because actually there's me at 50. Now I'm not worried about what my body looks like. I'm just bloody impressed with what it does. So I run ultra marathons, not very fast, but I do. It's about what it does that's exciting. And I think that mindset change for me has totally revolutionized the way I look at myself. And I would love to share that and help other people, riders especially, get to the fact that actually you should be amazed you're sat on 500 kilograms of prey species and you're fit enough and strong enough to be able to ride that horse well. So actually, does it matter what you look like and what your perception is? You should be really proud of what you do. And when we do our breast biomechanics research, people ride on our mechanical horse with nothing on other than markers. And about 95% of these people, they've got their boobs out and they're covered with markers. And I'm looking them straight in the boobs, and we're filming them, etc. And everybody goes, oh, don't look at my stomach. What do you mean your stomach? You've got your boobs out and you're not worried about that. It's actually this unrealistic image that we as women should somehow have a six-pack and have no nothing hanging over the top of your britches. Doesn't matter. I'm not, nobody's judging you.
Oh, Lorna, it's so lovely. Last night I managed to watch How to Look Good Naked, and it's Gok Wan's program. And you just remind me that, let's look at the norm and then let's dismantle it. So, let's just come on to some gorgeous questions. Christina's given us a really great question to dig into. So thank you, Christina. She's put here, women's health and comfort has always been put second, as you say. It's taken this long and nobody has done this research. In your opinion, are we, women, helping or hindering the progress in this area?
Great question, Christina. The answer is, I guess I don't know, but women who are considerably younger than me, will never necessarily have had to wear foundation undergarments, and kind of, I don't know. It's a really difficult one. We've always been prepared. Just look at stiletto heels. Nobody is comfortable in stilettos. But if we're going out, we don't feel often that we're dressed up unless we've got a heel on, to the point that we put a pair of ballet pumps in our shoes because we know these other shoes that we've just spent a fortune on are going to kill us after about an hour, if not less. But yet we still wear them. What is that about?
Yeah, we destroy ourselves for the lack of functionality, but that's tapping. Well, okay, let's briefly talk about that femininity, tapping into that. Do you feel like, okay, so we've got that, we're trying to balance that, and then Gillian from India, she's commented, we need other images, because basically the white jodhpurs, long boots, and a tucked in tight polo top really need an app update. So she's talking about, I talk about apps and update. So Isn't this interesting how we are feeling not squeezed, but maybe, I'm suggesting, I don't know, are we feeling penned in? Like, I'm talking about diversity and agency. You're the right person to talk to, Lorna, because you just show up as you.
I think we have a problem. We did in fact, we're just writing up a paper now, which was about women's comfort in everyday riding clothing versus competition clothing. And it's really interesting because that competition clothing is actually based on, centuries old hunting attire. And what do? We go and compete on a really hot summer's day with a pure new wool Barathea jacket on and a long pair of boots and a pair of breeches with a leather seat or whatever. There's no kind of technology, breathability, comfort, etc. in our riding clothing. And also it's quite masculine in form. And that's one of the things we found in our breast research, was that actually some of the boobs, like a compression bra, those kind of bras made people feel less feminine because everything was squidged down. And when you're then putting your competition clothing on, you then become even more non-feminine. And actually you can be strong and be feminine. That's what came back from a lot of people in that particular piece of research, is that they want to be strong and they want to be seen as good riders, but that doesn't mean that they want to not be feminine in their attire. And I think that's a really interesting question about why can we not be women and be strong as well? Why do we have to take on?
I don't often get to have these conversations. It's probably when you and I have over a glass of wine or gin or whatever, at a conference. But let's try and bring everyone else in as well on this conversation about being more ourselves, whether we're ebbing. Like, for me, there's no right or wrong. There's no judgment. I think there is quite a lot of bashing on things like women wanting to match attire, so it's called a matchy type of construct. Like, I don't get any of this. I really struggle, because I think if women are genuinely enjoying that process of matching things to each other, that's really, I love that. If women are being bashed because it's got you act with just being more ourselves, and having the freedom to wear smart technologies, or to be more feminine, or to be more homogenous, or to be like fashion does it all the time. We can pick and choose within a cycle of fashion of what fits us. Where when did that ability to have all these, when did we get so rigid as equestrians that we look with these white breeches, polo shirt? When did all this really kick in? I'm not saying you need to know the answer, I'm just raising it.
I think it's really interesting. I used to work for an old lady who was still riding in dressage, and she always said she could not understand the reasonably recent fashion for women to go back to riding side saddle, and how that was somehow romantic and elegant, because her mother, who had basically been a nurse during the First World War and then was out on the hunting field in the 20s, had fought to be able to ride astride and to be able to have that identity and not have to be dressed differently from the men. And she said her mother would have been horrified that actually somehow that image of a corset and you know, that was somehow still there. And that did make me think that maybe it's something about the gender equality in our sport, which we should be proud about, you know, for all the ways we bash lack of inclusivity and equestrianism, etc. We can't forget that when we go into the ring, it's the only sport at Olympic level where there's no gender differentiation, and we should be proud of that as a sport, you know. And it's been like that for such a long time. So, but maybe that's where it comes from, that history of women having to fight so hard to be accepted to ride horses in the same manner as men did. And maybe it's about that freedom to do that, and we're kind of living with the after effects of how hard those really brave women fought.
Wow, that's so amazing. I learnt loads from that conversation, and Becky's commented how coincidental she was typing as you were talking about side saddle, and how, you know, that there's been so much change. I just love the fact that we're obviously up for fighting for being more ourselves. Why then, and I think we can't finish, I mean, we've got 15 minutes, we can't finish without talking about women ripping down women, like shredding each other in equestrian communities, especially in the barn, in the stable, and just that whole construct of gossip and being active in gossip, and how if we're active in gossip, we're active in causing harm to other women. Like, we're hurting each other. You know, when we're on the end of gossip, it is always painful, always. So any sort of, do you want to navigate us down a specific road of this, or should we just have our normal usual chat? What would you like to do with this one, Lorna?
I think one of the memes I'd found that I just love is that we as women, we've got to remember that you don't make your candle burn brighter just because you blow out somebody else's. You know, and actually, you know, we should be fanning everybody else's flames. You know, we should be supporting them and putting them together, and then we all burn brighter, don't we? You know, so I think that's something to really remember. But I think there's just been a really interesting recent paper came out by McVeigh, where she followed a barn conversations and for about 18 months, I think, and that culture of kind of bullying but kind of subtle and putting people down for not being considered to be brave, etc., was kind of really interesting. I was talking about that with my master's students on Friday, and actually they were all looking at it going, yep, that's every yard I've ever been on. You know, they just described it in detail with your queen bees and your, you know, people in their little tribes and clans, and we couldn't come up with an answer about why that actually happened and why we see that in equestrianism. And I don't know, I've often hoped that I could just go to a dressage competition and hear somebody looking over the warm-up arena and them actually saying, gosh, that's a nice horse, and doesn't she ride it well? Rather than saying, but of course you would with that money, or of course that's the trainer, you know, without there being some kind of backup that says, well, I would be able to do it if I had their advantages. And I think sometimes it's a jealousy thing, maybe, rather than celebration.
Oh, it's rife, Lorna. It's rife. And that's why we're having these conversations. We're not going to shy away from them. It's rife. And I think what is the trigger? What triggers women to want to bring others down? Like you mentioned envy, that emotion of having a gap between where we are now and where we want to be. When we think about horses and how we have these unique relationships with, a unique individual, like every horse is unique, like really we could lead as a sport of all sports in diversity. We could lead this. Every relationship we have with our horse, and you can have a yard of 6 horses. Your relationship will be so different with each one of those 6. That's diverse. If we could show up and showcase how diverse we really are, rather than because of our difference, we choose to bring others down, because whatever that, when we like that, to me, I know it sounds really utopia at the moment, and I know that, but let's just have the conversation. Like, why would we choose to bring another woman down when in fact everyone, I genuinely believe this, is doing the best they can with the tools that they have at that time? Oh, it's just huge.
Yeah, I think there's elements of control in there, isn't there? And there's elements of influence. And I also think people like to get a reaction. And I've found, being on lots of DIY livery yards, I very rarely get those issues because they don't get a reaction out of me normally, And so if you don't react, go, yeah, whatever. If you don't react, then they have no control over you.
It makes lovely sense. I've got to go to the chat. It's beautiful. So thank you for all of you sticking with us as Lorna and I bumble our way through what we always do. This is what it looks like most times, but we're just minus the wine, aren't we? It's not quite midday yet. Right.
No, so honestly, I've only got
Shirley's put here judgment. She's put that out. Susan's put here, maybe the culture lacks empathy. I mean, empathy is something that we can teach. So I'm really positive about that solution, because if we lack empathy with horses, the same will be true with people. How nice is that? Any comments on that or thoughts?
Well, I've often found that people who are very good with horses sometimes lack that same empathy and relationship with people, and sometimes I've seen that in some coaches, their empathy and understanding of the horse and its behavior is great, but geez, they can't speak to people, and that's a bit of, that's a bit of a limitation if you're trying to coach people and improve them. And I saw one of the comments there from Menka was about underlying insecurity, and I think that's probably a really good call there.
Really good call. Gail's done something similar. She's here. What are your thoughts on how we can change this culture? Hard to change the culture when often it could stem or may stem from jealousy. So that is just huge. Yeah, go on. You go first.
Yeah. Well, I also think, and we've had this conversation as well with, again, some of my master's students who are learning so much more about horse training, for example, or learning theory, and they're kind of trying to maybe make comments in their own barn or their own stables and actually coming up against a brick wall. And I said to them, well, unfortunately, the only thing you could do is lead by example. You can only, you can't change people by coming up against them. You can only lead by example and try and do your best within that kind of environment. And if you don't get involved in that gossip or nastiness or whatever's going on, and you try and do what you think is right, then perhaps you might influence others in that way. But also, the only thing that allows that kind of culture to develop is if people do nothing. Staying silent only helps the oppressor. It doesn't help the oppressed.
And you know, when as soon as we speak up, the shame has to disintegrate. So that's the other thing about speaking up. Thank you for that, Lorna. Ella, who I met out in Rome, one of your old students, she's been here. I was thinking about the discussion a few minutes ago about rider image and matchy sets, and I thought I would do a quick experiment and put the hashtag equestrian into Instagram if this is the content that female equestrians are consuming. And then she puts here, don't fit in and they aren't good enough. So I think maybe you could expand it. You could, if you want to, raise your hand and come up on stage with us, Ella. It's up to you. We've only got 5 minutes left, so let's just see how that pans out. Menka's put here, I hear an underlying insecurity, and I think fear drives a lot of our sort of dark shadows. So that's things like jealousy, insecurity. People are very poor in dealing with. Now, do you think we've just done a full circle? You know, we talked about the braving virtue and how actually are we stepping into this sort of military or this culture of having to be brave? But actually, what if where our real strength and where our power with others to empower others is actually where we step into this place where we go, do you know what, right now I'm growing, I'm making mistakes, I'm imperfect. Like, you know, could that be something that women can really support women on? Like, what if we had communities where we own our mistakes and say, guess what, I did this today, and I think, who was it who put, Becky said, what, very rarely does she hear somebody say, well done. Here we go, about giving someone a well-deserved well done. You know, the well done could just be for owning our own mistakes. Like, I just don't hear it. Please correct me if you found communities that do celebrate your mistakes and congratulate you for actually stepping out of your comfort zone. Because if you're in your comfort zone, you're not making mistakes. Do you want to pick up anything out there at all, Lorna?
So I just think that one of the things that we need to do is we have to be honest with ourselves, and also people, well, I think women in particular try and be people pleasers, and we worry when people don't like us. Well, I've got above my desk, I've got a picture which is basically Alan Alda from MASH, who's saying, what, you don't like me? Sorry, just give me a moment while I deal with that tragedy. You know, people will like you or they won't like you. But I think sometimes the important thing for equine welfare is that you're true to yourself. Now, you might not always be right, but at least you're trying. And you were talking about purity in that white colour for International Women's Day. Well, I always think, you know, is it not maybe about purity of intentions? I might get it wrong, but at least I'm trying to get it right, you know, rather than, you know, if you do the same thing over and over, you'll get the same results. If I want better results, I have to change what I do. That means I have to experiment. And sometimes those experiments will be wrong, but at least I'm trying to get to the right place. So I have pure intentions, maybe.
Nice. I love that. Thank you for framing that. You always give me something to think about, and you always give me like a lesson, like a coaching session. And I feel like you've done that again today. So thank you. That whole just being able to show up to get it right rather than to be right. And I know I keep like talking about righteousness because I want to talk about it. I think we show up in, there's 3 types of way. I tell you what, I've got a classic one for you, Lorna, and I know we have discussed this, but we need a part 2, which is basically being educated at.
Yes.
So when we show up as a preacher, we're educating at others. It's the fastest way to shut down women and men and everybody. And when we show up prosecuting, because we think we're all about horse justice, that again causes more pushback and less together. And that whole just basically, if you're being a politician, you're sort of shape-shifting for each audience that you want to get on to like you. And so, you know, one minute you're talking about this, and then you shape yourself into something that you're not. So you're like a politician. Honestly, like when we start to actually have these conversations, maybe we can start to change what the jury you know, for me, the jury's out at the moment in terms of how can we help horses and horse welfare. We're doing it. We're walking our talk. What I'm really interested in is, will we ever show up not the knower? Like, can we actually all show up as the learner? What are your final sort of closing remarks on all of this chat?
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, Lisa, because you know, as a teacher myself, I've always said the day you stop learning is the day you should stop teaching, because no one knows everything. And actually, no one knows everything about horses, because they're each individual different horses. They've got different reinforcement histories. They've got different genetics, different temperaments, etc. So anybody who tells me one thing will work with every horse, I pretty much switch off and go, no one, you know, because it's not going to. But I think that learning and being open, and that's probably, and curiosity is really important. And that's one of the things that I'm really bad at. I'm not very good at prioritizing with my research. I'm like, what's that fish in Finding Nemo who gets totally distracted all the time?
Oh.
You know, so somebody comes along with a project that's totally out of my knowledge. I'm going, oh yeah, I'll get involved in that. So at the moment, I'm supervising a project on chewing biomechanics in okapi and giraffe. You know, so oh, that sounds interesting. I'll do that. Oh, look at that. That's nice. Oh, I like that one. So I'm curious all the time. That maybe doesn't necessarily help when you're trying to publish a body of work, but it certainly keeps you interested and curious. And I think if you're the learner and you're happy to be the learner, not the one who knows everything. And I'm always never afraid of my students to go, when they ask a question, I say, I don't know. Well, best we find out about that. I don't know.
That's a breath of air. That's such a breath of fresh air. Gorgeous. Thank you for that. I see this in a little bit more chat, and then we're going to bring it to a close. Once again, it's just so lovely for me to dig in with key subject areas. Eleanor's written, hi Eleanor, one of the areas that she found with her research was this desire, and this is what we could talk about, that we're hardwired for connection to fit with an equestrian identity. So I know Susan later on this afternoon, she's up at 6 o'clock actually this evening, is going to dig into that as well. But if you behave or identify with that identity, you can fit. So would we rather fit in, or actually, how many of us just want to show up as ourselves? Like, you know, when we have to be somebody else to fit in, that's not belonging. If you have to fit in, you don't belong. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. But, you know, your whole conversation for us today, Lorna, has really been, as I introduced you, show up as you and be more you. And, you know, you just fuse the science with story, which you said you would share with us today. Eleanor said, any deviation is other and no one wants to sit there. This is that discomfort. It really sits with the education accountability message and not shaming. Okay, gorgeous. We've done a massive breadth of coverage, and Jasmine's told us it's Dory, the fish.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much, everyone. We've gone over the time a bit. We're going to take a 10-minute break, pop into the arena, pop onto the different booths, have a chat with everybody, or go into the social lounge, have a chat. I'm going to be back up here because next up is all the way from Israel is Shirley Ferber, and she's going to share with us her story. So gorgeous, diverse women all morning, and we're about to kick off with going into Israel and the challenges, the cultural challenges for women in equestrianism and being in Israel. Thank you so much, Lorna.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you everybody else for all their kind comments, etc. I've really enjoyed talking to everybody today, and always, as ever, enjoyed talking to you, Lisa. Like you say, just a shame we haven't got a bottle of Ackerman open at the same time.
I missed you, my friend, but this makes up for it. So thank you for joining us. Yeah, and I learnt loads on that today again. So thank you. See you all soon. Bye. Bye.